here if you'd like to go deeper in what happened there. This is done in actual production. Last week I had the luxury of interviewing Jürgen, and I've not learned how to pronounce his last name, even though I got to interview him. He's Swedish at Saab Defense, and he's head of structures for the Saab Gripen, the plane on the right. They like to compare themselves to the plane on the left, the Lockheed Martin F-35. Now, many companies are involved in parts of the F-35, however, Lockheed Martin won the majority of the bid, and their name gets to be put on it for better or worse. As of last time, Congress required them to release how much over budget they were. It was $168 billion over budget. The total cost of the airplanes of the project, $1.5 trillion for last budget overrun. The World Health Organization said that's enough money to feed every hungry person on the planet for 50 years continuously. Congress said, I'm not sure we're spending our money on the right thing. For better or worse, the current president of the United States has said, I'm thinking of canceling all orders. This is inefficient. The cost per plane in 1 year went from $273 million to $337 million. Imagine if you told your customer that. Those things you pre-ordered, the cost just went up that much. Now, these planes are not the same, but they do have the same mission. They're both multi-role joint strike fighters. So there are some similarities, and Saab likes to compare them. The cumulative program cost of the Saab Gripen is $15 billion. I invite you to do the math. They use all Scrum. They fly a new plane, new software, new hardware, updated engines, sometimes updated exterior shape every 1 week. There are pilots in the team or pilots in the company, pilots in the same building to fly new planes every 1 week. The product owner, Jürgen being one of them from the structure standpoint, they aggregate the best wins over the last 6 months of all the sprints, and they release that as a new plane to the world's militaries every 6 months. The cost per plane is 20% of one F-35. According to Jane's Aviation Weekly, the plane built with Scrum is the world's most cost-effective military aircraft. The Lockheed Martin, meanwhile, is the subject of how the Department of Defense 1.5 trillion F-35 broke the Air Force. That's from the Fiscal Times.
Joe?
Sir?
How long did it take to get the first airplane out? The first one?
You know, they would not tell me, but they said they had planes flying very soon, sooner than they had before. But they said there's some information. You're talking F-35 or this Gripen, right?
The Gripen. I mean, was it always just take the last one and let's just improve it, or
well, there was always a first
scratch,
one.
or what?
Oh, so they reboot modules of it from scratch on a regular cadence, is what they told me. But in terms of specific times, they said the only ones who are willing to be public about are that we release a new plane every 6 months, and we're on 1 week sprints internally with new versions. So the other timings, I'm not able to get specifics. For the 45-minute interview between myself and Jürgen, it's on scruminc.com. It's called Scrum in Military Hardware. And we have just enough time, 30 minutes, for I hope for me to complete where Scrum came from. When we left off the story last, Jeff Sutherland had 2 of the meetings of Scrum, and one of the outputs, the artifacts, the burn down chart, and he used that to replace every Gantt chart. But we hadn't invented Scrum yet. Jeff Sutherland went on to be CIO or CTO of 11 companies in a row. In all of them, he made a ton of money. He was already independently wealthy by this point in our story. He was running a company, the tech part of the company called Easel Corporation, and it was on the corner of MIT's campus, right by the Media Lab. He had excess office space, and the head of MIT's Media Lab, Rodney Brooks, rented lab space from the Easel Corporation building, from Jeff. And they were building the world's first walking robot. At this point in history, no one had seen a walking robot, only in movies. So you had things like the Terminator. And this robot is this long and made of metal. And no one had ever seen one in real life. And Genghis Khan, is its name, would get out and would walk around Easel Corp. This was creepy. Genghis Khan had many different sensors put on him at different times. But in this point in our story, he had a heat-seeking sensor on his head.
What year was it?
This is late 80s. The first Scrum had not been run yet, and that's fall of 1993, but we're coming close to it. So this is likely late 80s. Jeff would know. I will attempt to ask him. So Genghis Khan would get out, and he walked into Jeff's office one day, Jeff says, and this metal robot is walking at him. So he's got this heat-seeking sensor that's to exhibit goal-seeking behavior. And he's coming at Jeff, and Jeff gets up on his desk, and Genghis Khan is pawing at the desk. He's trying to, keep moving. And Jeff's standing on his desk looking at Genghis Khan, and Rodney Brooks, the head of MIT's Media Lab, rushes in. This is his landlord, right? And he turns off Genghis Khan and is dragging him out, saying, "I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." And Jeff says, "Well, wait, what is this?" And Rodney Brooks lights up. Someone wants to know, right? This is his life work. He's now a senior officer at iRobot, so he's stayed with this trajectory the whole time. And he goes, "This is the world's first walking robot. It's Genghis Khan." And Jeff says, "How does it work?" Rodney Brooks almost bursts out of his skin, I'm told, saying, "Okay, we started with an expert system that would attempt to have a database of the environment the robot would navigate, and the expert system would command and control each leg what to do. It never worked. The robot would never walk. We worked on that for 30 years, and the best we were ever able to achieve is a smart chess program. What finally worked is something called the subsumption architecture." And Jeff said, "What's that?" Rodney Brooks says, "We couldn't command and control the legs. It never worked. What we had to do is give each leg its own chip that would say, I can push down, I can push forward, I can push back, I can lift up. And then there's a central chip in the back that allows the legs to say, I'm in this position, what position are you in? So they can query each other. Then there is a chip in the head, but instead of commanding and controlling the legs, it says, I'd like to go over there. Legs, can you figure out how to get me there? And the legs would self-organize. He said, that's the subsumption architecture. And Jeff said, well, that's complex adaptive systems, right? That's how we deal with complexity. That's how all life works. And Rodney Brooks says, exactly. So we gave a set of rules, less than 10, that can't be broken. And any other rule, the system can pick what it wants to do independently. And so it releases the illusion of control. Jeff said, interesting. Now I have teams of teams working at different companies, including at Easel Corporation. What do you think would happen if I gave them a short list of rules they weren't allowed to break, but then said everything else is up to you? Complex adaptive systems, the way all life navigates a system with variables. And Rodney Brooks says, I don't know, why don't you try it? And Jeff, at this point in our story, decided to try to author what he'd been doing. Instead of just doing it in one company, he was going to try it scientifically in his company to formalize a set of practices that could be published. Genghis Khan, as a complex adaptive system, was never programmed to deal with rubble, only move forward to the goal. The cool thing about not commanding and controlling, but using complex adaptive systems, or subsumption architecture, is anything that is physically possible for the organism is possible, is achievable, without ever having to have a plan in advance of how to do it. Because the system self-organizes to traverse rubble, walk upstairs, or deal with any situation it's physically capable of dealing with. If the build downstairs felt a whole lot like chaos, that's very intentional, and it doesn't get different. However, if you've been working in that environment for 3 months, it's very comfortable. It's just as chaotic. It's just as comfortable. You fully own your complex adaptive systems within a very narrow set of rules. In the Wiki Speed Shop, there's only 6 rules in a backlog. That's it. Jeff said, if we're going to formalize this as a system, we are going to also have to deal with change, emergent architecture. He took a team at Easel Corporation and said, every Monday I'd like you to do nothing but read industry white papers on what has historically sped up companies, because that's what I'm interested in, he said. I'm interested in companies growing revenue faster, delighting investors. Now, Scrum is a system for happier people, and it's often used just to boost morale. But the purpose of Scrum is to double the revenue of a company. That's its job, to double the financial growth. So they would read, this team would read any white paper on doubling the revenue, or increasing the revenue of the company. And they said the best we found about architecture is modeled after nature. Whether we're building hardware or software, it looks like Instead of taking the squirrel off the forest floor and refactoring the entire squirrel, or building a new squirrel, and then deploying it to the forest floor as now a flying squirrel, it looks like what has the highest success rate in actual project deliveries is what nature actually does. There's a mutation earlier on where suddenly the skin is more elastic. The squirrel can't fly yet, but it has more elastic skin. Later, there's a mutation where the hair follicles are now able to be angled, some of them. There's more muscle control of the hair follicles. Later, there's a mutation where the bones are more slender and in some cases a little bit hollow, more like a bird's bone. Later, there's a mutation where the hair follicles themselves are hollow and have much more lock, more like feathers. Suddenly, according to the anthropological record, we have squirrels gliding. It looks like punctuated equilibrium, where the squirrel is suddenly gliding. But the mutation pathway was developed over time. They said that's exactly how we have to do it. To have disruptive breakthrough change, we need to take the current thing and say, what can we change within a small time box that will allow this behavior to emerge? And it will take several of these changes one after another. They introduced the idea of sprints. Sprints are for architecture. Within a sprint is where the team is able to refactor the architecture of the thing, the product, the service, the business plan, the chemistry. And several of these together will allow the new property to emerge. This is agile architecture, and this is what Scrum is built to do. In software, these packets are deployable, service packs. If you can create one every sprint that updates a small part of the architecture of the system, you've now solved it in software. In hardware, we have modules, and team owns modules. So next sprint, our sprints are usually a week, not 3 minutes. Next sprint, a team could potentially enhance the module you're primarily working on. The wiring system, the control pedal plate, the steering column, one of the suspension modules, and deploy the enhancement in hardware. Darwin is famous for many things. One of them is saying, it is not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the ones most responsive to change. This sprint cadence, refactoring the architecture, is the method for Scrum teams to succeed here. That is their strategy for survival. The white papers started coming in from Jeff's team, reading white papers every Monday, academic lab results. And they said, Jeff, we're not sure what the ultimate system is going to be. However, we found there's 3 constraints. Whatever this is that you're going to publish with us, with what we're learning at Easel Corporation and the other companies you've been in, it's going to need to solve for these 3 organizational constraints. The first, Conway's Law. Organizations which design systems are constrained to produce designs which are copies of the communication structures of these organizations. They said, if we use a command and control organizational structure in our company, we will have a single point of failure. We will have a brittle product. We're not interested in brittle products. We're interested in products that are redundant and self-organizing, more like the internet. So we'll need a peer-to-peer networking structure. I think some of you already know how Scrum solves for Conway's Law, but let's make it visible. I'm lucky enough to have a team right in front of me. Who's currently playing the product owner? Okay, thank you. Let's say Joe comes down from sales and marketing, and I say, and it's Leilani.
It's okay.
So I come to thank you. So I come to Leilani and say, Leilani, the product that your team is currently. Let me rewind. So Leilani's playing product owner right now. Who's playing Scrum Master right now?
Right.
Excellent. So Kuhn and Paul are both development team members.
Yes.
So I don't come to Leilani yet. I come to Kuhn and say, Kuhn, this problem, this defect found in field, if you're somehow able to solve for it, to knock it out, by next Thursday, there's a trade show on Friday. If I can show this defect is no longer present in our product, I think I can sell to an entirely different business vertical and double the revenue value of this product. I have that chance. Kuhn, can you finish this defect for me? Interesting. What should Kuhn do? You're not allowed to answer. What should Kuhn do when this happens? Yes?
Go to the Scrum Master, you should go to the product owner?
It should be redirected, and in a very similar way. I'll actually give a slightly different answer, but very, very similar, yes. So Kuhn wants to stay focused on his current backlog. The product owner, before I even get to Kuhn, As I walk in the room, Leilani will leap out of her seat, take me by the elbow, and say, Joe, I'm so glad you came down. Where's your team's backlog of questions, or did you make one yet?
It's back there.
All the way in the back corner. She takes me by the elbow and says, Joe, here's our product backlog. Is what you're asking for more or less important than this? More or less important than this? Perfect. At our current velocity, we're trending to be doing that next sprint. I invite you to come to our product backlog refinement where we talk about this, and come to our demo where we'll likely have worked on this and maybe even got it done. Thank you so much. Scrum solves for Conway's Law by not having a command control structure. Product owners negotiate with product owners to decide what to do. And if any interruption comes to the team, the product owner interrupts it. They're the only role in Scrum that's interruptible during a sprint, the only one. The product owner's job is to be what is called the known stable interface to their team. So they need to be available and visible to the rest of the business or any interruptions. This is so important they have a backup. What does Diane do if she sees me even before Leilani sees me?
Grab.
She grabs me by the elbow, but not to take me to the backlog. That's not her job, to take me to Leilani. Now the teams, if somehow the product owner and Scrum Master don't see me, they should also say, let me introduce you to my product owner. Interesting idea, Joe. That might be amazing. Let me show you our product owner. How easy is this to do if this team is sitting this close together or closer all day, every day?
Easy.
Trivially easy. How easy is it to do if some of the team, some of the time, is in offices down the hall and sometimes the door's closed?
Too easy.
Still pretty easy.
Yeah, it's a little harder. The team has to agree on norms. Look, I know you're probably not going to see everyone before they get to me and might interrupt me, so I'll make sure I've practiced my introduction to you and feel comfortable even when there's some pressure exerted. I really need you to do this, right? Whenever that happens. How easy is it if the team's in multiple time zones?
Still easy. I mean, we do it all the time.
It is almost impossible.
It depends.
Now, Mary Michael's right. The distributed company she's in does do it all the time. And I like to think that by now it feels practiced. It requires careful adoption of a set of processes and tools for distributed teams that don't exist in most companies. It is almost impossible. It is achievable. If we do not enforce the self-organizing interface of Scrum, we do not solve for Conway's Law, and we end up producing products which are brittle. The second organizational constraint is Brooks' Law. These folks at Easel Corporation come in and say, it turns out the Mythical Man Month has never been found invalid in any company ever under audit. Adding people to a late project makes it later. So, Dr. Sutherland, if we're going to create something, and they haven't named it yet, it's going to be Scrum. If you're going to create something, how's it going to solve for late projects? Not the Scrum trainers and coaches in the room yet, but maybe the MBAs in the room or anybody. What have we been taught when a project is late? We've been taught to try something. What were we taught to do when a project's late? In traditional project management or in almost MBA?
Look at
A martini?
Martini.
Add more hours.
Crash.
Add more hours, add more people. Brooks
Increase
Law.
resources.
Yeah, ramp up resources. We were taught, and you said one too.
I said you crash the PERT. You look at everything that's the critical path. You focus on it. You let everything else slide and move the resources.
Critical chain, right? So we throttle by putting more people on the most important part that you deem, right? Well, Brooks' Law says it's only going to make it worse, and it's never been shown ever to not make it worse ever. So adding people to a late project later might not be the answer. What's the other thing we were taught? If it's not adding people, we were taught something else.
Use code.
Yeah, cut scope. Now that'll work if we can, if we're allowed. If we're not on fixed scope, fixed budget, that will work. What's the other thing we were taught, or the other thing we do? Actually, Rosemary said it. Overtime. Work harder. Well, just work harder. We've never heard that, right? And that typically equates to overtime. Just work harder or work smarter, right? Sadly often equates to overtime, even though it shouldn't. Also, I'll show the data shortly. Actually, I think it's Diane will show the data later. I think she pulled that section. Scrum teams that work more than 38 hours a week start to burn out and create more you felt how intense it could be downstairs. Imagine doing that for 60 hours a week. You're creating so many defects. If you account for the time it creates to counter the defects, you're going backwards. Scrum teams have a peak velocity at 38 hours a week, and it's twice a waterfall team at 60 hours a week. We'll walk through the data later. So overtime isn't going to help us either in Scrum. In waterfall, will help us a little bit till 60 hours a week. In Scrum, it'll backfire right at 40. So that won't work either. So in Scrum, we have 2 levers that will change this story. Well, actually 3. I'll mention the third. There are 3 that will statistically work. 2 of them happened in the Medco case study that Diane walked us through in the morning. What can a Scrum Master do to accelerate a late project?
Reduce
What can a Scrum Master do? A Scrum Master doesn't own the backlog.
Remove them.
Remove impediments. Teams, what is making us less happy or less effective? How can I help you solve it or find someone who will solve it? Medco did that. They had a list of 11 impediments, and the senior official from Toyota removed them all in 1 week, and velocity across the company went up from 60 points to 90. Our Scrum Masters solve for this by removing impediments, and that's anything that the team says is making them less happy or less effective. Secondly, our product owners can do something to accelerate a late project, and you said it. Yeah. Now, product owners do that not necessarily by cutting scope, but by prioritizing the highest value thing next. So maybe we won't get everything done, but we'll get, by definition, the highest value stuff done with respect for dependencies. Now, we can only shuffle order if items are independent, right? In the wild, most of the way we're asked to do work is highly dependent. So about half of a product owner's day every day is looking at the backlog and rewriting it to be more independent so they can shuffle the pieces. That's about half their day every day. And talking to customers to rephrase the requirements. And that's why many teams will use user stories, and we'll talk about that more later. So a product owner every day is reprioritizing what the team can do to have the highest value stuff next. Now the third is company structure. If the company is structured so that there's a team that does the planning, and a team that does the analysis, and a team that does the design, and a team that does the build, and a team that does the deploy, we hand off through those cycles. The fastest we can go is the speed of all those handoffs. Whereas if we have a team that has just enough knowledge in team to do more than one of those phases simultaneously, that's Scrum. It's much faster. That's up to company structure. That is an impediment. The Scrum Master will write it down and make it visible, but usually they need senior management to remove that impediment. So it gets a special category. That's it. Those are the 3 solves that will statistically actually change the speed of product delivery. Removing impediments, making the most value thing happen next, and company structure. The team then said, there's also Drucker's cuckoo effect. A cuckoo is a bird that lays its egg in another bird's nest. The other bird then expends the calories to incubate the egg. If the other bird discovers it's not their egg, they'll swat it out of the nest and break it on the forest floor. Drucker's cuckoo effect states any innovation in a company will trigger the corporate immune system to create antibodies to destroy the innovation. Sadly, we've probably all seen that effect in action at one time or another. Does anyone already know, beside the trainers and coaches, and some of them this might be new, but does anyone new know or have a good guess how Scrum solves for Drucker's cuckoo effect? I bet some of you do. When I say it, you'll go, yeah, that's what I was thinking. So we have a team here. Do you have a guess?
I have
Gun?
a guess. Is
Yeah.
it review? So we have a product, right?
Yeah.
And then we have to make it go through review.
Right.
Right, to see, okay, does this work? If it doesn't work, then throw it out. But it's not like we consider done to push all the way through, but it's more, does this work? If it's not,
So are you saying that maybe you build trust from the rest of the organization by incrementally showing stuff through review, stuff that's done?
Yes.
Yeah, much more often than usual. That's absolutely true. I'll get to something that happens even before that. How do you get permission to do it even in Sprint 1 before you've demoed anything?
I see.
And so you're not wrong, and we're going to build towards that. In Scrum, who's our product owner here? Okay, now the product owner is the only interruptible person on this team during the sprint, the only one. We're not allowed, and we will continually retrain the rest of the company. You're not allowed to talk to anyone in this team. They can ask you questions, but unless you're on a Scrum team. But you're not allowed to ask them anything. You only talk to their product owner during the sprint. How would anyone in the company know if this team is trying anything innovative during the sprint? How would they even know? About?
Right, looking at the visual management system or the dashboard.
Daily management board?
So they're going to know what the team is doing and in what order, and they're going to know how fast the team's doing it. How will anyone in the organization know how a Scrum team is doing their work?
Daily management board.
They can't. It's opaque to them. It's a black box. It's as if this team is skunk works in the California desert and no one's allowed in to see what they're doing until the end of the sprint. This team could vote, I want to work in the parking lot from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. every day. Company policy might say that's unheard of. Company policy won't know unless they ask the product owner. It's up to the product owner how much information they're ready to share. Now, in an extremely healthy company, they share everything. The product owners have centers of practice. The teams work in great big open rooms or glass boxes. Everyone shares everything. But in companies that are suffering from Drucker's cuckoo effect, which is common, especially when Scrum is new, the product owners say, you know exactly what we're doing, when, and when it's going to be done, and you will see it on a regular review, and so you'll know our quality or not. In exchange, we're a black box, we're a skunk works, and we will self-organize to decide what innovation we can take at what time. Until the company has demonstrated enough maturity to not mess with the team and let them continue to innovate. So the product owner is your one gateway to your own private skunk works. And Scrum is a system of Scrum teams, a system of skunk works that are hidden from the rest of the organization until the organization has proven its maturity. In exchange, there's more visualization than the company has ever had in terms of what is being done and when it's going to be done and with what quality level through the visual management. But they don't get to see how. That's up to the team.
So, question.
Sir.
So in a traditional management structure or matrix structure, whatever, you've got bosses who want to know how to evaluate employees and blah, blah, blah.
Oh, all those things, yeah.
And if it's all hidden,
Yeah.
you're not freaking out somehow.
How does that
Does
happen?
the team self-promote and decide who is going to be voted off the island and, who gets the raise?
No, I
and
just spoke to you, but I want to try to remember your name. I forgot
Mike.
already. Yes, Mike. So to Mike's point, how many have seen, and the coaches and trainers have, and we saw some of it yesterday at the state of Washington, but how many have seen more and more practices being promoted, books being written on team review, team incentive, team at a time getting promoted, or Valve self-organizing around salaries, or the state of Washington where they do a peer review and they rank themselves and rank each other, and then the team at a time gets a bonus or not, that type of thing. Scrum doesn't mandate that, but that's very compatible with Scrum for that reason. So companies, as they launch one Scrum team and say, well, that's interesting, how does that engage with our review cycle? Well, they still have managers for now, maybe, because the rest of the company didn't change, so we'll still have them do their one-on-ones and their reviews for now. Well, what happens when half the company's on Scrum teams? They say, maybe we should look at something different. And that's where these practices are being more and more and more adopted. Items like holacracy, items like collaborative reward, item like the Valve HR manual, which has gone viral and been famous. So you don't have to start there. You can start with the same system you have now, with Scrum Team 1, 2, 3. But there becomes a tipping point where the company says, this system is incenting individual high performers, which is less impactful than incenting high-performing teams. How do we change that? And the company, I'll say, wakes up, but whatever language you'd like, and says we should try something new. Did that get to your near-term quandary, Mike?
It explains overall that you have to see it happen in a large corporation, how that would take effect.
I'd ask someone who's been in a company who was in the previous world of annual reviews and managerial reviews, and where their company then did hop, Paul Tacken being one, where the company then did hop to having a much more agile system of review, to sit next to Mike on one side of him at lunch. So he has an opportunity
Who are
to
you?
get at least one perspective. I'd ask you to find Mike. Paul Tacken is one. I'd ask you to find Mike, and there's many. these are the organizational constraints these are the organizational constraints for which any system of project delivery must solve. And I'm glad I got to mention the ways Scrum is built to solve them. So Jeff said, now I think we can actually build this thing. They built a system of 3 roles: product owner, Scrum Master, development team, 3 meetings. Now there's 5 meetings in Scrum, but we'll get to that in a minute. We started with 3. And 3 outputs. Let's name the 3 outputs now, because these don't get enough time in any class, in my opinion. The first is the product backlog. This is required in Scrum. It's the ordered list of the thing we're trying to build. If we're an organization that doesn't have this, it typically indicates we're not sure what we're building, and the project is unlikely to succeed no matter what method we claim to use. This is required. The second is the sprint backlog, and we're on the last one. The sprint backlog, which is the team's understanding of the piece of it with which they're focusing right now. In the build exercise, you folks had one large chunk, but one chunk to focus on, not the whole car. How do you eat an elephant? One piece at a time. So you focus on just the windshield, just the wiring. And later, we will complete the entire vehicle. It's all in the backlog. So we have a product backlog, a sprint backlog, and our third required aspect of Scrum is called make work visible. That's lean management. That's from the Toyota Production System verbatim. Most Scrum Masters choose to do that through a burn down chart that's in front of the team, where the team and everyone else can see it, and taking the sprint backlog and product backlog out of Excel or Jira or wherever they are, and putting them on sticky notes and taking a picture and sending it to everybody once a day. That's how most Scrum Masters will solve for it. Or they'll make a great big monitor outside the team working area with Jira on it or whatnot. But they'll make it walk up simple. Sir?
In time-intensive teams where time is of the essence,
Which is typical.
Isn't that a non-value add? So
Which
if I
one?
already have a tool that's doing this and my team is inundated in the tool,
Right.
Isn't it a non-value add now for me to take these out? If it's not the organizational's requirement for me to display this,
Right.
am I not wasting time rebuilding these for a tool that I already have?
Brian, I hear you. Here's where we tend to have an advantage
Okay.
at making it visible. Remember what happened to Company L2? Company L2 already had all their reports of where they were losing points, and it hadn't changed in 202 years.
Mhm.
It's making work visible outside the team, broadcasting it. In Scrum, we call it an information radiator. That's what inspires the team. It'd be like if you whispered to every football player every game, here's the score, versus having it up on the scoreboard for all the crowd to cheer about. It's a totally different experience. So the data is in 4,000 companies studied for 20 years. And this is statistically the fastest. So yeah, it does take time. It's not free to do that. But if we have a Scrum Master, we at least know whose job it is.
What happens if your Scrum Master is also part of the development team as well?
If the Scrum Master is unable to perform as a Scrum Master first, so here's what if you have a product owner who also delivers stuff, or Scrum Master who also delivers stuff? If the backlog isn't reprioritized today, and the customer hasn't been interviewed today, and the technical landscape of what we're delivering to hasn't been influenced to expand what the team can do today, then the product owner is not allowed to pull backlog. They're not done being a product owner yet today. For a Scrum Master, if the information radiator has not yet been updated today, and impediments haven't been worked today, they're not yet allowed to pull backlog. If they've gotten those done today, then yes, some Scrum Masters, some product owners can. But the other job comes first. We'll hit that again later, and I think it's in a section Diane's taking, I think. Someone asked me about that section. It's coming soon. Jeff then said we now have the rules of Scrum. There's 11 laws in Scrum altogether. 5 meetings, 3 roles, 3 outputs. That's it. That's all of Scrum. There's 11 laws. That's it. That's all of Scrum. We now have first version of those. They had 3 meetings to start with, but 3, 3, 3. They said now we need to name it. His researchers came across a paper that had been written in 1986. At this point in our story, it's fall of 1993. And it was called the New Product Development Game by 2 Japanese researchers, Takuichi and Nanaka. And they had studied dozens of companies, indexing them by how much money it cost to create innovation. they found the most expensive was the NASA model, where you had a team plan and then write documents and hand them off to a team that would analyze that plan, and they would hand off documents to a team that would build according to that analysis, and a team that would hand those documents off to a team that would test, and they would hand those documents off to a team that would deploy. They said far more financially efficient were teams that had banned handoffs, like at Fuji Xerox in Japan. What they did is they had a team that would write the plan, and they would join for a little while the team that would do analysis. So the analysis team would do some planning, and the planning team would do some analysis, and they were banned from handing off documents. Instead, they would work together to transfer knowledge. Then the team that's doing the analysis would actually join the team building it. Now that's a real change of job. You're going from your desk job at your typewriter at that time, or maybe your word processing station, to then the build area and helping build. And the builders would do some analysis. And all the way down to the deployment people would do some test, and test would do some deployment. This was faster, according to the Japanese researchers. The fastest model is when there were no handoffs, one team did it all. They observed this in the fast-track projects at Honda, Canon, Toyota, and we have someone here from 3M. They observed it in one of the teams at 3M, and it hasn't been observed since. It died out. It didn't become part of the company DNA, according to them. But it did happen, so it can happen, where they had one team, and they started doing almost all planning. And then they were doing mostly analysis. But in the very beginning, they were actually deploying something small. They were doing some build and some deploy. And at the end, they're doing almost all deployment, but they're actually even doing some brand new planning, analysis of that, and some build. One team all the way through. Takeuchi and Nanaka said it reminded them of the game of rugby. And not just any part of the game of rugby, but the scrum formation in rugby, where the team is trying to push in one direction at the same time, and you can't really tell what player is in what role. It's hard to tell who's the test lead or the junior production developer. It's a team pushing together. They called this Scrum Project Management. Jeff said, that's it, that's what we're trying to build, that's the name, it's called Scrum. He credits Takeuchi and Nanaka for naming Scrum in 1986. It's now fall of 1993. They ran the very first sprint with the very first thing called Scrum. 3 roles, 3 meetings, we're going to add 2 in the next sprint, and 3 outputs. He contacted Takeuchi and Nanaka and said, what else did you observe in the highest performing companies? And they said, the teams were given a transcendent goal to self-organize around and achieve commander's intent. For example, at Canon became a very wealthy company while Takeuchi and Nanaka were studying them because of one project, the Canon autofocus camera. This camera, according to Takeuchi and Nanaka's notes, the entire product specification was deliver the world's first autofocus camera. It can't cost more than our top-end point-and-shoot camera. Team self-organized to figure out who's on the team, how you're going to do it. That's it. Those are your constraints. So they would call that a transcendent goal. The team then has autonomy of how to deliver it, and that resonated with what Jeff had heard from Rodney Brooks and his understanding of self-organizing teams. And he had the idea that self-organizing teams that could understand state theory and retrospect their way up state theory could become hyper-productive if they were left alone enough to be able to change state, to actually mutate, which would require radical innovation. To do that, they would need cross-fertilization, where in team, ideally, there'd be every skill required to get the thing done, so you didn't have to hand off to another team. Now this is hard in practice, but that is the goal. Just like your teams here attempted to deliver entire car parts. And it's not that we had the machining team and the aluminum procurement team. Each team tried to self-organize to every part in the phase. Jeff was then flown to Japan to meet Takeuchi and Nanaka. Takeuchi is now Dean of Harvard Business School in the United States, and Nanaka is now head of the Hitsubashi Business Institute in Japan, which trains all of the execs of the top companies in Japan. Essentially, Japan's Fortune 50 are all trained every 2 weeks, every year by Nonaka-sensei. And luckily for me, I've had a chance to work with him as well. And I get to be part of that panel this year, in 2017, in June in Japan, with a translator. And the Japanese say, Jeff, you've solved for it. You've created what we wanted to happen systemically. We observed it in each of these companies as a flash that then went away. You have discovered how to make it part of the company's structure and be sustaining. They said, Scrum is a way of doing, a way of being, a way of life. You naturally live your life according to these principles, and high quality work and high profit naturally is left behind from your life. Well, that's a very Japanese way of looking at things, but I find it fascinating. Right before lunch, I'd like us to be very clear on what Agile is, because it's not the same thing as Scrum, but they complement each other. So Jeff ran the first Scrum team in fall of 1993, and he'd been building it for the decades before in pieces. He was then invited to Snowbird, Utah in 2011 with a group of other process management experts to see if they could come up with a simpler way to manage businesses that was lighter weight than what was currently being used. And in 2001, Jeff helped write what is called the Agile Manifesto. So Scrum predates Agile. Many companies conflagrate the two, mix the two up. They're not the same. Agile is a mindset. It's a set of goals and wishes, a way of thinking. Scrum is a recipe to make Agile happen. Scrum is something you can implement and measure against. Agile is a wish list, which is fantastic. For the new people in the room, it turns out the way to memorize something with the highest resolution and for the longest is to stand up in front of a group of people you don't know and read it out loud. I would ask 4 of us, of the folks getting certified today, to each know one of the Agile values really well. Is there someone who'd be so brave as to stand up and read the first Agile value out loud while the rest of us stare at you? Thank you very much. Mike, would you kindly read our first Agile value?
Individuals and interactions over processes and tools.
Folks, would you give Mike a hand? Thank you. Now, which was the second hand I saw? Yes, would you be so kind as to stand and read the second one?
Working product over comprehensive documentation.
Please note, and your name again?
Jack.
Jack, please note, Jack didn't say no documentation. Agile teams are sometimes accused of this. That's not the point. A certain level of documentation is often legally required to sell your thing. It's not no documentation. What this is saying is, if you have a choice between writing a plan of how you will try to do the thing or making a prototype, the teams that make a prototype first deliver earlier with higher revenue than the teams who start with a document. That's what this is saying. So if you have a choice, start by mocking it up. Those teams statistically deliver faster and make more money. Who would be so brave as to read the third? Yes, Gunnar. Thank you. Folks, please stare at him. It will help him remember.
Customer collaboration over contract negotiation.
And our fourth and final Agile value. Thank you. That's the first hand I saw, all the way in the back.
Right.
And your name again?
Matson.
Matson. Thanks, Matson.
Yeah. Responding to change over following a plan.
Now note, planning is everything, but the plan itself is worthless, so following it isn't gonna be our value add. Now all these things sound good. How to do it? How could we possibly take a project that's late in development and not sink financially the project by making a change for the customer's competitive advantage right before you're done? How could you do that? That's where Scrum comes in. Scrum is a recipe to make that come true. These are wishes, but it doesn't say how. There's 12 principles behind it, and that's the entire definition of agility. This is a Scrum Inc. class. We attempt to be completely thorough. I'd like to start here and work our way around. 12 people have a chance to speak. Would someone at this table be so brave as to stand and read the first Agile principle? And we'll hold applause till the end. Yes, please.
Our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable product or service.
Thank you so much. Perfect. Would you go next?
Welcome changing requirements, even late in development. Agile processes harness change for the customer's competitive advantage.
Rosemary, when you're ready. I caught you right in a yawn. So when you're ready, if you do it.
Deliver a working product frequently, from a couple of weeks to a couple of months, with a preference to the shorter time scale.
Our fourth.
Yeah, business people and developers must work together daily throughout the
inspiring to run an agile project? Actually daily. Okay, hang on, it's worth stressing. Oh, was that a question or a
Build project around the motivated individuals, give them the environment and support they need, and trust them to get the job done.
Perfect, thank you so much. Now, many agile projects aren't launched by looking at a spreadsheet to say who has what skill. Let's add this to their existing workload, or let's pull them off what they're on now. Most agile projects are done by saying, here's a project we want to do, and then someone makes a poster in the cafeteria and says, who wants to join, who's available? And you're surprised by who shows up, but they're excited. And they don't always have exactly the right skill. It turns out, statistically, they deliver faster than the perfectly built team of matrix spreadsheeting. Now, this isn't required, but this is the agile vision for project launch. Now, that takes us to the next table back. Would someone here read our 6th agile principle? Yes?
The most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face conversation.
Perfect. Second is video chat. My favorite, who would be so bold as to read our 7th and my favorite agile principle?
Joe's favorite. Working product is the primary measure of progress.
Thank you so much. Principle number 8, Matson.
Agile processes promote sustainable development. The sponsors, developers, and users should be able to maintain a constant pace indefinitely.
Principle 9.
Continuous attention to technical excellence and good design enhances agility.
Now, there are only 12 agile principles. 2 of them are about architecture. How often does this suggest we would revisit the architecture of our solution? Hardware, software, mechanical? Continuously. We would potentially be able to update the architecture of our petrochemical solution, our business plan, continuously. That is the goal of agility. Number 10. Mary Michael.
Simplicity. The art of maximizing the amount of work not done is essential.
And there's our lean, built absolutely core. Some people will say, is Agile compatible with lean? Very much so, and this is one of the most clear tie-ins right at the onset. Now that takes us to this table. Would someone be so bold as to read principle number 11? Thank you, Lonnie.
The best architectures, requirements, and designs emerge from self-organizing teams.
Perfect. That's our 2nd principle about architecture. Does this say there's an architecture team separately, a master architecture team with the deepest architecture experience that creates the perfect architecture and hands it off to the team? Or that there's someone in every team that understands the architecture enough to try something new safely? What does this say? The latter. The latter. It says each team is able to update their own architecture. So we attempt to seed just enough information to try safe architecture experiments, or more if you have that expertise, in each team doing the work. That is a faster model, is what agility proposes. And our 12th agile principle. Either one.
At regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective, then tunes and adjusts the behavior accordingly.
Perfect. Now, agility is a set of wishes. Scrum is a recipe to make it come true. Which of our 5 meetings in Scrum makes agile principle number 12 come true? Retrospective. Folks, we held the marks to the end. Thank you very much. This
Joe,
brings us through, yes,
question,
sir.
before you go on, you talk about architectures, and so in a complex system, if each team is self-organizing their architectures, the compatibility gets reconciled how?
Would anyone like to practice? So train the trainers, we spent some time on this Monday and Tuesday. Would anyone like to practice your answer? Our clients are all gonna have this challenge. What's the best we've learned so far on this? I saw Bell's hand first.
All right, I'll give it a shot and you can correct anything I mess up. What I've thought about is, or what we discussed before, is that the product owners for the modules can gather up in what is called a meta scrum to make those architectural decisions and to have all of those discussions and assumptions, and also to break down the vision and the master product backlog into team backlog items that are actionable and have the level of detail or the definition of ready for that modular team.
Is
Is there anything anyone would like to add to Abel's answer as well? So yes, I agree. Thank you, Abel. And there's even something else we got. I saw Chris Wallace's hand first, and then if there's more to add, actually, I'd love to hear.
So I think the use of a modular architecture with known, clearly defined interfaces, so that the different modules can communicate together in the architecture.
Therefore, it doesn't matter if they're different as long as they can.
The interface needs to be defined so that they can communicate or
And
or
product
connect.
owners own that? That's what I heard over here.
If there's a change to it, all the product owners are going to negotiate it. Now, whoever says, I have this need for this change, it won't happen unless the product owners prioritize that in Metascrum, because no work gets done unless the product owners prioritize it. But someone might say, I have a change that's so dramatic, it's going to even change our interface. Product owners do that now or later, and they determine with each other, and not without the other product owners knowing, so they create the corresponding update on the other interface. So if it changes, it happens through Metascrum, and I think Abel said that eloquently. Typically, it doesn't need to change, because the interface is defined up front. And then Petri, does it still stand, or did Chris say what you were going to say?
I would, because the way I like to say it, the team, I mean, with one team, they have to deliver a working product at the end of the sprint. Now, if you have multiple teams working on the same thing, that same responsibility relies on all the teams together, so that they have to align themselves with one another. Metascrum being one part of that, but also the inter-team communication possible, like architectural communities and practices and things like that, allow these conversations to happen, and they have this responsibility to build a consistent product with architecture that works. So you can't deviate from that shared plan, but you have to agree what that shared plan is. The minimum in hardware, it can be the known interfaces, and you have to agree how you're going to change those when you have to.
I'd like to add a phrase there which says there is one single point of truth, and that's the product, the integrated product. So in software, it's actually the code. Don't start branching and all these things. Downstairs, it's the car. So all together, there's a technology being used for achieving that. It's called just talk. So people regularly find several spots which you just mentioned to sync each other on the product.
So this is where software and hardware may differ a little bit.
Yeah, it's a little bit more complicated.
Folks, at least. Thank you. Did that give you something to chew on?
Give me something to chew on. I'm used to the command and control. There's one architecture team, they dictate the interfaces, blah, blah, blah. And this sounded, if it's truly amorphous, then when they're all going different ways, you mentioned it had to come together somewhere. It's not clear where in this process it comes together.
Permanently.
We can go to
Permanently.
Always.
To be continued.
Yep.
To
Okay.
be continued. The Cliff Notes answer, I think, has been said, and there's a chance to chew on that. This brings us to the third organizational mega issue that Scrum Inc. has brought in to try to solve, and I'd like us to try to solve proactively in our own companies and our own work. The organization is not able to update itself. Even if it knew what its impediments were, the organization isn't able to make change to itself. How many top managers have you spoken to, or have you been, where they say, I feel like I have no steering wheel to my company? I've actually been to Scrum Master training. I'm a believer. I don't even know how to implement this. I don't know how to make my people do, I can't make them do something. Even in command and control organization, we hear the senior leadership say, I command, but it doesn't mean it happens. So what do? How do we actually improve a company if we feel we can't influence it directly? Bad symptoms are these people report to me. I can change their priorities. I'm bonused to build my empire. I have 5 management initiatives and I'm working 8 hours a week. If you're bonused to build your empire, how likely are you to let this cell independently discover where it is in state theory and change itself to try to become hyperproductive? Well, someone else is bonused to build their empire too. And if their change to become hyperproductive makes them under someone else for a little while, you are bonused to try to prevent those evolutions. How we know this has been fixed, there's an enterprise action team, actually immediate technical debt refactoring. This term was renamed a few years ago, and somehow this was not updated or written. Bang. There is an executive action team that is removing organizational impediments on a weekly basis. So there are impediments to an organization, like we have a central architecture group that will not allow updates to the teams only once a quarter or once a year. And so the teams aren't able to inspect and adapt to solve their own problems. An executive action team would receive that impediment and fix it that week, at least one impediment a week. If we see this, we know the organization can refactor itself to improve. They can improve their own structure. Teams are easily refactored to optimize production. If teams are rigid and they can't update themselves, we're obviously not experiencing complex adaptive systems or its potential benefits. There's just a little bit more to this section, but it's lunchtime. Folks, it's 12:50,